I'm Tanushree, and let's talk about what could possibly happen with research in the future. Okay, so research, as we know, was designed to be a science. We go out, we collect copious amounts of data, we code it, we put it through tools and analyze it and come out with these fantastic multicolored coded results. But what we are trying to code and analyze and put through tools is human thought, human psyche, human behavior, human stories like we just so beautifully heard. And the mind doesn't quite like to be caged and coded and color coded and stuff like that. So, and that's where the entire dichotomy of consumer research and just researching the human mind lies. We just are not facts and numbers that would flow very neatly and sort of fit these squares and circles that as researchers we try to fit them into. And this is what leads to a lot of message being lost in translation. So there is this famous example of when Sony test marketed the Walkman. It failed. Consumers did not understand why they would need music which was personalized, playing straight into their ears, when the entire point of music till then had been communal. That we play music together, we enjoy it as a group, we dance to it. It was a collective communal experience. Somebody in Sony still decided to take a punt and go ahead and launched Walkman. And Walkman was a huge success for maybe 15 years and 20 years. But I don't think that's where the success of Walkman really lay. What that experience and success did was to tell the world that there is merit in customized and individualized and personalized technology and technical solutions. And therefore, somebody thought of a telephone which was just for an individual, a telephone that you could put in your pocket and walk out of the house with, just like you could do with a Walkman. And and that's just changed the whole game. I mean, now our world exists in our mobile phones that we carry in our pockets. But none of this knowledge or insight sort of came from the consumer. The consumer said she didn't want it, she didn't see any purpose in it, and it was just counterintuitive to how she had ever imagined technology being used. The other aspect is that even if the consumer does realize what she wants, is she always willing to tell us? If it is about price, no. Something embarrassing, something sensitive, no. Her friend is listening into the conversation, no. Also, are we really listening? I mean, as human beings, we bring in as much bias to the table as the consumer does. And that's where a lot of the messaging gets lost. In my experience of now almost over 2 decades, I've realized that there's a shift from knowledge and exploratory research to testing. And it's almost a chicken and egg story. If we did enough exploratory research and if we had sufficient confidence in our consumer knowledge, consumer understanding, we would be less sort of induced to test a 5-cell basis, innovation, mix and stuff like that. But the purpose of a lot of these 2-day sessions is to bring qualitative research and therefore in a way exploratory research back center stage. The whole shift that is happening from knowledge gathering to testing is also because the stakes have gone up. Companies are big, there's just so much money goes behind innovation and you just cannot risk it. Also, as marketers get smarter, they get better at gaming research. I mean, the smartest marketers I've met can practically game any research. They've just cracked the codes of getting tested and getting green cells and all that. Also, because of what we are trying to test, which is human psyche and human response, invariably the research finding is open to interpretation. All of this, in the end, corroding the credibility of the entire consumer research process. Not because the research itself is not rigorous, but because human response is open to interpretation. And this is where neuroscience comes in, and this is how neuroscience could really change the game for research going ahead as I see it. So, any human thought or desire or motivation triggers a specific neural in the brain, and that can now be studied and interpreted to understand what consumers want, taking away the taking away the option from the consumer of actually answering a question. So you're not asking a question, you're not answering, she's not answering a question. It is her bodily and mental reaction, and that is not within her control. So there is really no bias and no filter that she can apply or we could apply. As we can almost imagine and predict, the first sort of frontier where neuroscience was deployed was in stimuli testing. One, because we have had a trend of more testing than more research, but two, also because it was just simpler. So eye tracking for advertising or pack testing, pricing has been studied quite rigorously through neuroscience. Facial coding, ad codings, etc., is where we have seen the deployment of neuroscience in the last few years. Where it gets much more interesting is to use neuroscience to understand the more subliminal human responses, what consumers would not talk about, which is what consumers would possibly not even understand, which is their motivators, why they say what they say, why they think what they think, what do they actually think. So as an example, Mainrai Institute tested some songs with consumers in a traditional market research survey, and they asked which of these songs do you think will become popular, and consumers gave a set of responses, and they simultaneously mapped their neural brain working when they listened to the songs, and the two results were very different. What the songs that triggered brain activity and neural activity were entirely different from the songs the consumers said they liked and they would like to hear. At the end of 3 years, they went back and looked at the data. And neuroscience had correctly predicted the songs that would become popular. But the consumer, when she heard it, was not able to respond correctly in that sense. And this is not data that she was even trying to hide. There was no sort of obvious bias, but subconsciously she did not know which songs would eventually grab her psyche, the rhythms that would settle in. But brain functioning knew it far more intuitively. So, taking neuroscience in research beyond stimuli testing and really trying to understand psyche, there's been some stellar work done by Dr. Konstantinos Pandatos. He's created this wheel of motivation and spoken about it extensively in his book Brand Aviators, where his rationale is that all human activity, desire, impulse, instinct, thinking, and any pre-thinking sort of before action is rooted in motivation, and anything fits into the set of 12 motivators between play, seek, feel safe, balance, care, desire, connect, control, grow, create, defy, and transform. And he says that all categories and all brands sort of fit one of these motivations, or one of these human motivations, and we use a brand or use a product or a category because it fulfills one of these motivations, one of these core human motivations. So how this works is that he has looked at about 200 odd categories, and he's clubbed each of the categories into a core fundamental motive, that human motive that the category fulfills for us. He then looks at brands and tries to map the brand and tell you if the brand is also on the right motive. So for a fizzy beverage, the motive, the human motive is play. But if I have a fizzy beverage in market that talks more on the language of seek, then I have a fundamental mismatch. But if I am Coke and I have been positioned on the motif of play for like 100 years, then I've already hit my sweet spot. I don't have the need to go back and reposition my brand. People understand what it means. It has that conveys that meaning very intuitively to them. And once you have the right marriage between the motivators that consumers seek from the category and the motivators that your brands fulfill, then you're already on a sweet spot and you can reiterate that message through words and quotes and packaging, format, shape, colors, sounds, language, the works. So we have an example of this brand called Owens, Illinois, which is one of the world's largest makers of bottles, and they make bottles and design bottles for most of the big brands that we sort of are familiar with. So they deployed the wheels of motive, and we have a small case study that I will just play.
We are makers.
Uh, can we play this? Thank you.
We are here today to talk a little bit more about our Catalyst collection, which we've recently brought into the marketplace.
We've partnered at OI with Grand Aviators, who are a neurological scientific research group, and they have helped us understand the core decision-making processes from a biological level that subconsciously inform decision-making.
We felt that we could bring the core fundamentals of the Grand Aviators concept into our design process and reimagine the way that we think about designs. For the initial workshop that we conducted with our global design team, we asked them to completely rid themselves of their preconceived notions around glass design. We brought our entire global design team into Perrysburg to our global headquarters and gave them a deep dive into the 12 driving motivations that Brand Aviators has developed in terms of understanding how to connect with consumers on an emotional scale. The intent of this collection is to reestablish glass and the iconic nature of glass and do something that no other packaging format can do as effectively or as uniquely, and create really powerful shapes through glass structure to connect with consumers on an emotional level.
Our goal within, again, the Catalyst collection is to kind of give a voice to those motivations that are drawing people into a specific category. So Defy being a strong one for craft beer, we really wanted to focus on bringing a bottle that had a little bit more attitude to it. But as we designed and refined and finalized this bottle, we came to affectionately call it the Misfit bottle. The reason for that, the shape itself tends to kind of stand out, has this like slightly slanted shoulder, so it has a nice attitude to it. But as you put multiple of these bottles together and imagine the labels falling in different places across the bottles, they tend to stand out almost as this little misfit gang of bottles.
Our standard designs are great, but we feel that the Catalyst collection really elevates it and has the ability to tell the brand's story in a much more meaningfully effective way.
Glass already transforms experiences into something amazing, but these new shapes can take your brand to the next level of being an icon that stands out from the show.
So this is where the brand reached after they looked at neuroscience
We
to
are
develop.
makers, value creators, scientists, inventors, engineers, designers, industry shakers. We're transformers, sculptors of sand and fire. We capture the essence of a brand like no one else can, forming beautiful stories told through glass packaging and our signatures on every bottle we make. We transform moments into magic. Engage your senses, the sound of bottles toasting, the way it feels in your hand. A taste so pure, it's gotta be glass. A packaging so sustainable, it can be recycled again and again and again and again. We turn beverages into icons, build brands as famous as their silhouette. Shut your eyes. Can you see it? We're masters of engineering emotions that transcend language.
Love,
amor,
joy,
喜乐 radость,
trust,
confidence.
confiance.
We've always adapted to change, And we're prepared for the future, a healthier, more sustainable, more exciting future. Because our mission is transparent, clear as glass. We have two initials, and the emotion we feel is pride. OI, engineering emotions. We are making.
Okay, so the rationale here is simple, that you use the wheels of motive to really biologically understand what drives consumers to a certain category. And after that you don't really have the need to switch your brand positioning, brand segmentation, tonality, vocabulary, fonts constantly. And there's very good reason why this works. So it's been studied and proved that in the state of rest, the human brain consumes about 25% of the body's calories or energy. Given that the brain is such a high energy consuming organ in the body, it is also clever enough to realize that it should conserve energy and not use too much of it. And it does that by avoiding to think wherever it can. Very difficult for a lot of marketers and market researchers who feel that they're overthinking, and very difficult to stop the chain of thinking. And I wish I could think less and calm down, but the fact is that the human brain really tries to avoid overthinking. It does that by falling back on codes and fonts, colors, smells, sounds. Everything that goes into creating a brand image is part of a code that the brain falls upon. So, and therefore, when you establish your brand deeply on the right motive, then your job is done. It is the consumers get pulled to your brand. There's really no sales push, etc., needed after that. Like the category of whiskeys plays on growth. The core motive is to grow. So a brand like Johnny Walker just simply been saying keep walking forever and ever continues to keep walking forever and ever. The other very interesting benefit of biology-led research over conventional research is that the core human motivations are the same for all of us. They don't change by gender, they don't change by age groups or by geography or by cultural nuances. And therefore, once again, when you identify the right motive, you can have the same brand positioning in perpetuity for the entire globe. You don't need to sub-segment, you don't need to micro-segment, you don't need a different positioning platform for Asia versus the Europe. And it doesn't change. The core human motivators are not likely to change over even 100 odd years. They possibly theoretically still could, but it is certainly not a seasonal change. It certainly doesn't need renovation and revamping every year or 2 years. So once you've sorted it, you've sorted it. And that's how we possibly going ahead, hit bullseye more often and test a little less. Questions, anyone?
Hi, this is Kelly from Grab. I'm just wondering if you can use neuroscience in more categories where you need system 2 thinking, where it's more logical. For example, financial products and telco. Is neuroscience still applicable for these categories? Thanks.
Yes, it is, because even when, there are two reasons. One is, even when we think that our actions are very, very rational, they are still emotional. Especially things like insurance. Insurance is really about comfort and safety. So it's a very emotional decision, however much we try to rationalize it on finance and stuff like that. So it applies across the board. In fact, I think insurance is one of the categories that is looked at and segmented and provided motivators for.
Fascinated by the example that you gave of the the music, like what we actually say, but what actually we feel as well. And often I think when you look at things like the when we've created some content or we've created some commercial space, do you feel like if you separated the visual from the audio and you looked at the two in isolation, because I think quite often when people are doing neuro research, and for example, like even like Sally from the BBC was mentioning earlier on, we're testing the two in comparison to each other, but they're very different experiences. Like what we hear in both places, what we see, and then we put the two combinations of the two together. So do you feel that we should be utilizing this more at a granular level, that we should be looking at the component parts rather than always testing the end result?
Okay, so this really depends on how well designed your final product is. If you have the audio and the video giving out exactly the same cues and cueing the same motivator and on point, then the composite testing would also be effective. But if you're in the stage of learning and understanding if you're even cueing correctly, if our communication is being correctly designed, then there is merit in separating it, testing the two together, and then you will have very different learnings and insights. One is what does the audio do for my consumer, what does the video do for my consumer, but also are the two in sync? So
Hi, Rocky from R&D. My question may be stupid or a little technical, but first question would be, how do you collect the data? Because previously in Nielsen, we do have neuroscience, and there's a cap, you put a gel on the head, you stick it with all the computers, and there's the reading of the EEG. Is it still the same methodology for your consumers? Do you still go through this?
Yes, to understand neurosignals, till now this whole capping and gelling and all continues. So really, it really is that to see what part of your brain is being triggered. Yeah.
Then that may be the stupid question. The technical question now is, at the time, if I remember, we only have 3 KPIs, which is recall. I don't remember exactly what it is, and they made some computation to cross-tabulate the 3, and they made some interest and all. Now we are looking at a whole entire wheel of motives. My question is, how does an EEG result could be translated into the different emotions? Because at least from my plain understanding, an EEG can already be intense, and the intensity cannot tell you whether it's positive or negative. It's just intense. We know that there's a brain activity, but the interpretation of that activity, we don't know what it is. So my question is, with this all EEG reading, how this translates to the entire wheel of motives?
So what the wheel does, it looks at brain mapping to understand intensity. It also looks at what part of the brain is triggered, because it's not just intensity. Different parts of the brain being triggered have different meanings. And it also looks at the semiotics of the category to also qualitatively understand what that semiotics is indicating for large brands that have been in market for many years, that have been consistent in their communication. And then try to understand and interpret what the brain triggering in a certain area where it is getting triggered, where the neurons are getting triggered consistently, the same spot and the same intensity, and the messaging on ground has been over the years, and therefore what it could indicate. So there is a little bit of qualitative overlapping and mapping there to really come up with these 12 motives. It's a little bit of a black box and a little technical, but I do hope that I gave you some perception of how this works.
It's triggering my curiosity, because my understanding previously from EEG is about, to qualify different brain waves into rather positive or negative, and probably more at a granular degree, saying what type of emotion. But just now you mentioned different parts of the brain activated would be an indication telling what nature of the emotion is triggered. Is that the case?
Difference in emotions will trigger different parts of the brain. And the intensity would tell you how deep that arousal is. So that's how you would go around mapping it. It's almost like how the tongue is mapped. The tongue being a simpler organ than the brain, we've now got it mapped that this section of the tongue triggered is sweet, and this is sour, and this is savory, and this is spicy, and all of that. And the brain we haven't mapped out as well as we've mapped out the tongue. But in a way, they're both studying research through biology.
Sure. Let's take that offline later on. But just a point on the tongue, which is part of my expertise on sensory science, different part of the tanks. That was a story of 1930s about, and now recently, nowadays, we science realize that it's activated everywhere.
I see.
So different part of the tank it was a myth.
Is
It
it?
was a reality now. Yeah.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
that's new learning for me also.
Okay, thanks a lot for the discussion. And then definitely neuroscience and all of those is very advanced and new front-end things. And it takes time to be more investigated and validated and by consequence,
Yeah,
put
it's
forward. Yeah,
correct.
thanks for the
Thank you.
introduction. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.